welcome.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you for having me. Well, my talk is about web performance and what it has been working in that for a few years. So first, a little about me. I was born on the South Pole. My friends like to say that. I'm from Chile. I'm a web engineer. I've been working in Adevinta for the past 5 years. And working in Adevinta, I had the chance to work with other marketplaces like Subito, Willhaven, Jofogage, Kufar, and Segunda Mano about web performance. I'm also the maintainer of a couple of open source libraries. First is Lighthouse Viewer, is a wrapper of the Lighthouse report, so you can load the report in your React application or Vue.js application, or Svelte or Angular. So for that people that like Angular. I'm also the maintainer of the Lighthouse plugin Cracks. This is a plugin to fetch information from the Chrome User Experience Report. And also of Carbon Tools. This is a set of tools that which you can estimate the amount of CO2 you are releasing by sending assets or bytes over the internet. So you can have an estimation of how much CO2 you are releasing to the atmosphere every time someone is visiting your page, for example. I'm a member of climateaction.tech. This is a non-profit organization in which we can make decisions, because as software engineer, we can make decisions which reduce the carbon pollution of applications. It's on us, so we can do it. And you can find me in Slack as @Danilo. So, because I've been working in the past 2 years on performance, I learned one thing or two that I'd like to share with you. This hopefully can help you to save some time or headaches that you can have. First one, the first topic is about the weight matters. And I would like to start with the images. So nowadays, this is according to HTTP Archive. They run this web almanac every year. They see how is the state of the web. And in the average page, more than 50% of the size of the page is from images. So if you want to start working in performance, reducing the size of your images and optimizing them is a really good starting point. While working with Subito, we try to address this problem. So how we can load the appropriate size of the image. And we started just like this. We were simulating a Moto G4. And we look at the width, screen width. It's 360 pixels. We look at the image, and the image size should be 328 pixels. But for our surprise, when we look at the code, that what was actually loading was the image of 984 pixels. So instead of loading an image that should have a weight of 5 kilobytes, we were loading an image of 200 kilobytes. And we were puzzled why this is happening. And the thing is that the browser, if you're using a pictures SRS set or the picture tag, the browser, how it does the calculation is to multiply the number of pixels for the DPR. And here I'm quoting and remembering the Daniel Gallagher talk yesterday. This is about respecting the user too. So we need to give the best experience to the user. So if the user has a really good screen and can load a really good image, we should try to give them the best image possible for their circumstances. But if they are having a slow connection, or they are in the subway, etc., or they have the header about data saving, we could choose to show no image, or maybe show image on demand. If the user clicks the image, we load the image, or just show a lower resolution. The next one is about uncompressed file size. So the interesting thing is every time or I've seen that when we think about what is the size of our page, we look into the gzip file. So the gzip size. So, and the thing is, if you look at a page and you run the performance trace, as we saw yesterday with Juan, you can notice that more than 0.5% of the time on loading the page happens by scripting. And this means is reading, parsing, compiling, and executing JavaScript and CSS. So it's really important to focus on this, This is not considering and using gzip is not going to make the scripting part go faster. So I like to use Vanderphobia, and this page always gives you both sizes, the minified size and the minified plus gzip size. So when it comes to take a decision which library you have to use or you are going to use, I like to just look to the minified size. Okay, so when you are building your application, focus on the minified size, not the gzip, because this is not what is going to happen in the browser at the end. The browser will decompress it and you have to deal with that big JavaScript file. The next one is about how the HTML size matters. So very often, we focus a lot on the CSS, the images, the JavaScript files, trying to make them smaller and smaller and smaller, but we forget about the HTML. And when we use techniques like SSR, a lot of code or scripts can be loaded in the body of the page. So this is the case for Amazon. In Amazon, the HTML of the page is 100 kilobytes transferred, but after the decompression of the HTML is 472 kilobytes. The same happens to other pages, and we can see how in some pages is even 10 times more the size, or even more. In this case, we have the last one is 55 kilobytes, but after it's decompressed is 800 kilobytes, almost 900. So this can be very difficult. We need to be mindful of what we are putting in our HTML. Sometimes it's just a JSON with the data, but yeah, we need to be aware of this. The next section of my talk is about Lighthouse and Web Vitals, something that I realized, something that I came with, and something that I noticed working on. So the first one is a very fair question, is what and who we are simulating. And this part is pretty straightforward. We're simulating a Motorola G4. It's a feature phone. Should be around $200, 180 euros. And we are simulating a 3G connection. The thing is, in Web Vitals, we have these three metrics: the largest contentful pane, the first input delay, and the cumulative layout shift. And we divide people in these three buckets. And each bucket represents a grade of experience. So if the user is in the green side, you know that the user is getting a good experience, but if the user are in the red side, they're having a bad experience. But how this plays with performance, the performance score. The performance score is a little ethereal, ethereal. You don't know where exactly it fits. So the idea of Lighthouse is always be simulating the worst case scenario in this case, or the average worst case scenario. So if you improve your performance score, you will be effectively reducing the amount of people that will be in the red zone for Web Vitals. And to pass the core Web Vitals, the objective or the goal is to have people in the green side, more than 75% of people on the green side. So in this case, we can see that the first input delay is green. We are passing that metric. But in the other cases, we are not passing because 34% of people is only having a good experience. And in the way this works will depend on each country. So there are countries where most of the people have iPhones or they have very, very good mobile connections. And in other countries, most of the people have feature phones, Android, very cheap phones. So achieve this 75% can be harder or easier depending on the country. My next recommendation is don't follow blindly every Lighthouse recommendation. I've seen this a lot. It had happened to me, and I made this mistake a lot of times. And when you run Lighthouse, you get a suggestion like add preload these key assets to improve the loading by 1 second or 2 seconds. The thing is, you add that, you add and preload that the suggested library, you run Lighthouse again, and then you get another suggestion, add the other libraries too. And at the end, what ends happening is that you have a lot of libraries, and you have, well, all your libraries preloaded. And this can make really weird issues. So we noticed in Next.js, in previous versions, in the version 10 and previous version of Chrome, that all the JavaScript files were after in the last part of the body, but every file has a link preload on top. And what happened is that because the browser starts executing things in layers by nodes, traversing the nodes until the lowest part, when the browser reaches the script at the bottom, they already have the file that was preloaded on the top. So instead of start showing something, the browser got frozen and start trying to render in that JavaScript, and that JavaScript don't render in a sync form. And this affects a lot the first contentful paint. So if you notice that you have a first contentful paint that is really long, and it shouldn't be that long, maybe it's because your async scripts are behaving like synchronous scripts. Next one is focusing on the wrong metric. So while working in Lighthouse, I noticed that I can group some of the metrics into different groups. And I like to group them by a type on how they interact with each type of page. So I like to think that we have pages that are content first. The focus of these pages are to show content to the user. This, for example, for us, the add detail or add view page is a page that is full content. You know, it's all about see the image of the product, see the description, and see the price. This is more important than contact the seller, you know, or to see the footer or to see whatever else. The most important thing is to see the content of the ad, because with that you can take a decision of move to the next ad, return to the previous, or try to buy. And for this, I think the best route is to optimize what I like to call the visualization metrics. So first, work on the first contentful paint. You know, give users feedback that your page is loading, is doing something. So as fast as your page stops being just a blank page, that is pretty good, because then the user understands that, okay, something is happening, the server is responding, you know, it is loading. Then the speed index, that is not as important as it was before. It's only measured how quickly the page becomes populated. So if you have this icon font that is just a square because it hasn't loaded, how long it takes from become a square, from a square to the actual icon. So if it's quickly, it's pretty good because you feel, okay, this is loading pretty well. And the LCP, the largest contentful paint. So in the case of the add view, is determined in this page. What is the most important content of this page? Is the header? Is the footer? No, probably no. Probably is the image, probably is the description and the price. So this should be the largest element in the page, and it should be also the first content to load. All the other content is secondary. Then we have this other type of page that I like to call the interactivity first pages. And in them, you have to optimize for the interaction metrics, like time to interacting and total blocking time. What kind of page would be like this? For me, an example would be a chat page. If you are coming to what you have the messaging part, the most important thing is to be able to interact with the chat. Okay, it's not to see if I'm logged or to see my previous ads or to see the footer, but to be able to interact with the widget. The same could be said about a login page. The important thing in a login page is to be able to load. If you can interact with the elements, the page is not working. So here is to focus on the time to interactive, that is make the page consistently interactive. You know that it's not yet frozen. When is the last time that it gets frozen? And the other is the total blocking time. So optimize for the page to react always quickly to the user, to user input and interactions. About the CLS, we're going to talk later. This other section is called Mythbusting. So while working in this, I made some research and I get point to, okay, this is the best book on web performance. And after you see this is a book that is 10 years old, it was written in a different internet, and a lot of the things that they were considered best practice back then are not a best practice or the best way to go right now. So the first one I see is concatenation, bundling, and create this big chunk of JavaScript and CSS and only send one asset instead of several smaller assets. Back in the day, this makes sense because browsers could only download a fixed amount of assets at the same time in parallel. In the case of Chrome, it was 6. In the case of Firefox, I think it was 5. And depending on the browser, it was a different amount. So to download the next asset, you have to be downloaded the previous assets. You can start before, you can start earlier. And the thing is that this is not longer true. So now if you are using HTTP2 and TLS, SSL, probably you are doing this already. You can download all the assets in parallel if they are in the same domain. So this is very important. They have to be in the same domain, and you can download them in parallel. Next one, external CDNs. So once again, back in the day, this type of code was something that it was recommended. If you're going to use jQuery, it's very likely that other pages were using jQuery too. So instead of having to host jQuery and the user has to download jQuery over and over and over again, you could just download it once, and this would be used in all the other pages that uses jQuery. The same applies for fonts like Roboto. That is jQuery is not using too much now in your pages, but I've seen a lot of the fonts being used nowadays. The thing is, this makes a lot of sense because in the past, browser had this shared browser level cache. So if one page downloads something, this is going to be available in the next page. The problem with this is for the last couple of years, and in the case of Safari for the past like 5 years, every page has its own cache. So if you download an asset in page A and you try to download the same asset from page B, it's going to be downloaded all over again. So effectively, the fonts, for example, every time you enter to a page, you're downloading a different copy of the font. This is for security reasons that I don't have, we don't have the time to explain it, but now it's a standard, and all browsers are doing this. So this is not true anymore, okay? Don't use external CDNs. Try to use it and host the files in your host, because if you're using HTTP 2, you're going to have the advantages of HTTP 2 and download all the assets at once. The next myth that I stumbled is that think that performance is just a technical problem. So if you will see it as a technical problem, we can do a lot of good improvements if we focus on the code. You know, we can refactor things, we can delete libraries that are not being used, we can reduce the bundle size. We can do a lot of progress and improvement on this side. We can also do a lot of improvements if we focus on the configuration. So maybe instead of use gzip, we use broadly. Maybe it will configure or we put all the assets in the same domain. We can get some winnings, or if we use a CDN from in a better way and optimize the CDN, we can get a lot of things. But at some point, you hit a ceiling. You know, you can't go and improve anymore. And to do this improvement, you need to do fundamental changes in the page. Like, for example, hide this part of the page inside a modal, so it's only loaded when the user interacts with this. Or maybe change a carousel or a gallery plugin you have for a different one that is more performant and is weight less. So the issue is, when you start doing this kind of changes, you will need to get on board people from UX, maybe, if you are changing an element that is visual. Maybe you want to remove an A/B testing library if it's not being used, and then you have to talk with product, you know, because, okay, they are using this and maybe they don't want to change it. And the same happens with analytics and other third-party scripts. So if you try to sell these changes after, it's pretty difficult to get them on board. But if you include them from the beginning, they would be more willing to do this type of changes. So in my experience, try to include them as soon as possible from the beginning and see performance as a shared goal. You know, it's something that we all want to do together. The next myth, I would say, that is underestimating the content layout shift. Sometimes we think about the content layout shift as only, you know, this annoying thing that shifts the page and you end clicking in some place that you didn't want it to do in the beginning. So this is normally how CLS work. Here we see the page, we see that something loaded, then the font, the correct font was loaded, so the size of the page changed, and then you loaded this beautiful banner on top telling people to use the application or subscribe to something, and this moved the content back. So maybe at 2.7 seconds I wanted to click in the Facebook button there, but I missed it because then 3.8 seconds changed and I tried to touch it again, and then I missed it again because we load something on top and move the layout completely. The thing is, this is not only affecting CLS. In this case, when the loading starts, this is the largest contentful paint, this text. But after the font is loaded, the largest contentful element becomes the image that was on the bottom part, even though the image is not fully shown. But after the other layout shift, the image gets outside the viewport, and then this is the new largest contentful element again. And what is happening here that, okay, you maybe have like a decent CLS, content layout shift score. Okay, it's pretty good by the standards, it's just 0.1, but it's affecting your largest contentful pane. So effectively now, your largest contentful pane is 9.1 seconds, not 2.7, not 3.8. So if you're having this problem, or you're having this kind of problem that inexplicably the same element at the beginning that is the largest contentful pane is the same at the end, maybe there is content layout shift involved. And my last point that I want to share with you is this, is sometimes we think that our users don't have this problem. We think that maybe in our country, we are different, or maybe circumstances are different. For example, there are some countries where most of the population use only iPhones, and they have really good phones. But you have also other countries where the majority is using feature phones that are cheaper than $200. And the thing is, if you see this, if you start optimizing only for the people you have, you left a lot of people outside. You have potential users outside, and you are sabotaging your own growth if you do this. In other cases, you have a lot of part of the users. So, for example, this is a big marketplace on the right. They almost have 50% of the population enter monthly to their site, but they're also leaving at 56% of potential user, maybe less because babies are not going to visit our marketplaces. But in this case, if we don't look for them, what we are going to end doing is leaving people outside. And these people, maybe that we are not considering, is people that don't have the means, don't have the money to afford things, because they don't have the money to afford the latest iPhone. They only have this really old Android phone. And maybe they're the people that need to use our platform the most. It's people that needs to buy this second-hand item because they don't have other way. But if we leave them outside our page and we don't think about them, we are just pushing away. So this is food for thought. It can be controversial sometimes, but I think it's worth to think about it. If you have any questions, please write it in the channel or Slack me directly. I'm happy to talk about this and to share experience. I have other things that I would like to share, but we have a matter of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Danilo. So I recognize that we're almost right at time, but there are 2 quick questions in the chat. So let's try to answer at least one of them. Okay, so John William has asked, what do you expect will be the performance when HTTP/3 or only relevant for users on slow networks?
So for what I read, I haven't tested HTTP3 myself. There are not much changes in terms of performance on how the things are moved and shipped. But in slow networks, we can see some improvements, but it will depend on the size of the assets. And I think now the bottleneck is not much in the network; it's more in the browsers that the users are using.
All right, and one more really, really quick one. I know that Eugene is waiting on the back end, but from Juan from yesterday, do you have any thoughts on how the new image formats are making an impact on web performance nowadays?
Yes, so we can note really big differences between loading a GPG or PNG versus a WebP or Aviv. I think between GPG and WebP, sometimes WebP is higher. You know, the asset it has more weight than JPG. So you need to be careful of choosing the right element and to have this in mind. In the case of Aviv, it's always good. It's always lighter than the original GPG, but you have partial support in browsers.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I won't take any more time out from Eugene's presentation. Well, we might take just a minute from the break then later just to make sure he has enough time. Thank you so much, Danilo, and definitely check out all of the love they're sending you in the comments. So we'll see you in the audience.
See you.